Welcome back, everybody, to the final part of our look at the story of Admiral Yi. I've just been blown away, as many of you expected that I would be when you've recommended this story to me repeatedly for the last couple of months. So I'm glad that you did. As always, thank you for this community who has been tremendous in your input and your suggestions. And as I've mentioned, if you're new to the channel, I do read every single comment on every video. I don't always respond to every comment, but rest assured that even if I don't respond, I do read every comment. As the channel grows, it gets harder and harder to be able to take the time to respond to everything. But I do value this community. This community is what makes all of this possible, but also what makes it enjoyable for me. So thank you for that. If you didn't see the first 4 parts of Extra History series that I've responded to, I'll give you a link in the description that will take you back to the beginning. I'll also put a link in the description to episode 5, which is the start where we are starting today. And yes, for the first time, I have my Vlogging Through History merch, which you can get on the merch store. Either in the below the video, it should show up in the description. If not, there's a link in the description. This is the whiteout version, which is an all-white logo, and you can get it with different colors. There's all kinds of different colors of shirts, t-shirts, long-sleeve tees, hoodies available, as well as a color version of the logo on lighter colored shirts, so it shows up well. And we will always be looking for new opportunities for the merch and different things we can try. We have a channel on Discord specifically for you to suggest ideas for merch. And the last thing before we get started, thank you to all of our new patrons. We have a number of people signed up in the last couple of days. And I will be updating all of the merch on Patreon. If you sign up at a certain level and you're there for 3 months, there's merch that Patreon automatically sends out. And I'm in the process of updating that merch to the Vlogging Through History stuff. So that'll be something you'll have eligible. But let's go ahead and dive into part 5.
When we left off, Yi had crushed the Japanese at the Battle of Myeongyang and was busy rebuilding the Korean Navy after their disastrous losses while he was being falsely accused. Now, just as he's beginning to coordinate with the Chinese Navy on how to prosecute the war, something major happens. Maybe the one event that can truly change the course of this war. Hideyoshi dies. 6 years and 4 months after the fateful Japanese landing on Korea, the man who started it all, the man who envisioned a vast Asian empire radiating out from Japan, died. This was a sea change. Hideyoshi had been holding the Japanese in Korea by sheer force of will. As soon as he died, the council of men who ran Japan in his stead all looked at one another and said, "Does anyone here actually want to keep fighting Korea?"
That's interesting. And, and think about what would have happened, for example. I'm not comparing Hideyoshi to Adolf Hitler, for example. Not at all. I'm making a comparison between events. Imagine if in the summer of 1944, if Adolf Hitler had died, or if one of the assassination attempts had been successful, the outcome of the war would have been different. I mean, the Germans probably would have sued for peace. A lot of people probably wouldn't have died. And honestly, there's a good chance that the post-war world, including everything that happened with the Cold War, looks completely different. That's the kind of change that could have happened with a death at the top like that.
Okay, show of hands, who wants to stay in Korea? Nobody? All right then. With that, they agreed to pull the Japanese forces out of there as soon as they could negotiate a deal which would let them withdraw their forces safely. But the Koreans were not so eager for peace after seeing hundreds of thousands of their countrymen slaughtered during Hideyoshi's invasion. So Admiral Yi continued to coordinate with the Chinese forces to bottle up the Japanese in one of their last strongholds.
And that makes me curious, and I'm sure it won't be mentioned in here. I wonder what the casualties were like for this war. So I'm going to go ahead and take some time to look that up. So here you go. Here's some of the information, and you can see the Japanese invasions of Korea from 1592 to 1598. And you can see all of the information here. Obviously, you have Korea and China on one side, Japan on the other. Look at the number of military commanders who died for Korea. I mean, pretty much every one of their major military commanders died in these wars. And then, of course, you have Japan and all the different shogun, I guess, the states there. But total casualties and losses. The Koreans lost 1 million civilian and military deaths. The Chinese lost about 36,000 and 100,000 on the Japanese side. So that's absolute. But there's those 500 ships. Devastating to Korea. I don't know what Korea's population was at that time, but that might be something worth looking up as well. Okay, so here you go. The Shozan, I guess that's probably how that's pronounced, Shozan Kingdom. You can see here in 1500, 9 million, and by 1600, 11 million. So we're talking about 10% of the Korean population died in this war in 6 years. That's just brutal. Brutal, absolutely brutal.
The port of Suncheon. The Chinese army closed around the city on land, and the Korean and Chinese navies blockaded the port. Seeing the situation as hopeless, the Japanese commander decided the best option he had left was to try to bribe everybody. But each time it seemed as though he was succeeding in bribing the Chinese contingents, Yi shamed them into falling back in line. Seeing no hope of...
Yi is like their moral compass at this point. Everybody else just wants to compromise, wants to submit, wants to give in, wants to kind of sit aside. And Yi is the guy who's holding the line and basically holding Korea together at this point.
Peaceful retreat. The Japanese commander had one last plan. He dispatched a messenger boat to slip through the Chinese lines and tell the other major Japanese garrison to deploy all their ships and rendezvous with him as they tried to break their way through the Chinese and Korean blockade. But Yi got word of this plan and knew that he must prepare. The next night, November 15th, 1598, long after the sun had fallen below the horizon and the water had faded from blue to deep black, Yi told his forces to slip away from the blockade. They would try to intercept the reinforcing fleet in the fateful Noryang Strait. Near 2 a.m., the joint Korean and Chinese fleet fell upon the resting Japanese ships. At first it was chaos, cannon lighting up the water at night, but soon the Japanese tried to regroup. Despite being caught off guard, they still had 500 ships to the combined 150 of Yi and the Chinese. And moreover, they were fueled by desperation. If they lost here, who knows if they'd ever see Japan again?
Yeah, and this is an important thing. When people basically have decided that it's either victory or death, they will fight, like many times their strength.
But the Allied forces had two advantages going for them as well. For one, they had once again caught the Japanese in a strait where they could not easily maneuver their massive fleet. And two, even if they could maneuver, many of their ships were transports, which were only useful for boarding and arquebus fire in a fight. In desperation, the Japanese attacked, driving their ships through the withering hail of the enemy cannonade. Unfortunately for Yi, the Chinese commander, who wasn't used to fighting the Japanese and had no experience with Yi's long-range form of naval warfare, charged forward to meet the Japanese fleet and prepared to engage them in hand-to-hand combat. The Chinese commander was surrounded. Dozens of Japanese ships descended on the Chinese flagship. Yi ordered his own ship to attempt a rescue. Yi's flagship plunged into the midst of the enemy.
Now, again, this is loyalty right here, and this is character. And Yi is obviously a man of very noble character. He didn't have to do this. He could have said, you know what, that guy's an idiot. He just cost us the battle. He's going to die. And stuck with his strategy and probably saved a lot of lives. But he goes in to protect his allies.
He was committed now. It would be fierce, close combat the rest of the way. Exactly the type of fight Yi had always tried to avoid. The vessels were so close that unarmed Korean sailors began throwing bundles of burning sticks down on the enemy decks. As Yi's ship broke through the waves, he spotted 3 of the enemy's admirals standing on the deck of one of the Japanese ships attacking his ally. And so, Yi drew his bow and loosed. One of the admirals fell.
Nice.
For a moment, there was almost a silence in the midst of the fighting, as everybody looked to see where that arrow had come from. Then one of the Japanese admirals roused himself from his shock and shouted that it was Yi. All the ships must attack Yi. All the Japanese vessels turned and began to give chase to Yi's flagship. But now it was the Chinese admiral's turn to take action, and his ships tore into the vessels pursuing Yi. Soon the fight was on the deck of the Chinese flagship, Chinese Dao sparking against Japanese katana. In the end, the Japanese boarding parties were repelled, but many from both sides lay dead on the deck. As dawn began to bring light back to the scene, everyone could see how badly the Japanese were faring. They attempted to flee, but Yi would have none of it. These people who had come to his land, who had despoiled his home, who had slaughtered his people and endangered his nation, no, he would not let them flee. He grabbed the mallet from the ship's drummer and began to beat the war drum himself, urging his ships to go ever faster.
This is like the ultimate made-for-a-movie moment, right? Finally got the upper hand, and the great admiral grabs the drum and starts beating it himself. I mean, I know there have been a couple movies made about Admiral Yi, and I haven't checked any of them out, but I hope they really did this scene justice.
The haunting echo of the drum pushed the fleet on. Its beat hounded the Japanese, bit at their heels. His fleet moved like it never had before, the drum steadily beating like the call of the god of war. They were upon the Japanese. Cannons roared, arquebuses answered. Shouts and screams were heard as ship after ship was caught by the pursuing fleet, possessed by the beat of the drums of war. But then, just for an instant, the drums faltered. Seen by no one but his son, his nephew, and a loyal servant, Yi had been struck by a stray arquebus ball. They rushed to his side as he slumped against the drum, trying to aid him, asking if there was anything they could do. With his last breath, he said to them, "We are about to win this war. Keep beating the drum. Do not let anyone know of my death." His son picked up the mallet and continued the beat. Dressed in Yi's armor, his son and his nephew took up the command. For hours, they were Yi, commanding as he would, with all his ability and skill. None of Yi's officers ever realized he had fallen until, as the battle was closing, the Chinese flagship was once again surrounded.
And if there weren't already enough comparisons to Admiral Lord Nelson, Horatio Nelson, dying at the height of his fame, at the height of victory, like Nelson was killed again by a bullet at Trafalgar. You know, it just seems so fitting that this is what would happen. But even again, in his dying moments, to think ahead of what the effect could be on his men if they found out he died. And so telling them, keep beating the drum, having them put on the armor and covering it up until after the battle was over is just once again showing his brilliance.
Yi's son ordered his ship into the thick. They darted forward, breaking the cordon around the Chinese flagship, helping the Chinese to escape. The fighting was fierce, but it was near the last of it. And as the day closed, the Chinese admiral sailed toward Yi's flagship and called out to thank Yi for saving him, to invite Yi to celebrate the glorious day together. But he was met by Yi's son. Instantly he knew what had happened, and 3 times he threw himself to the deck, wailing and crying out, "Even after death, you saved my life." This was the last battle of the war. 300 Japanese ships were destroyed or captured. After this, the remaining Japanese garrisons would either be captured one by the Chinese and Korean forces, or slip back to Japan to fight one last struggle before Tokugawa's ascension as shogun. At last, the Imjin War was at an end. Hideyoshi's dream of a Japanese empire was broken. Korea was free. But Yi would never see it. Thousands turned out to see his body returned to his small home village. People lined the road and wailed at the passing of a man they may never have met. The Chinese admiral wrote for him a eulogy, and even the court and the king tried to make their recompense. And so passed the man so ill-treated in life, so often demoted and accused, the man who would forever be known as the martial lord of loyalty.
Oh, that was so good. That was so good. And you can actually, if I ever get the chance to go there, you can actually see Admiral Yi's tomb today. I want to pull that up for you real quick. So this is it, and it's fittingly a turtle ship. I mean, is that not the ultimate honor for a man like Admiral Yi? I don't know when they created this like this, but absolutely brilliant. And I'm so glad that you guys recommended this story to me. What an incredible man. What a noble guy. What a man who rose above and beyond what would have been asked of any man in the service of his country. And he's rightfully viewed as a hero of Korea, and I can see why. Some of you have recommended to me that I check out the Lies video, which they always do at the end of a series because they give a lot of the sources they use. I'm going to watch that, but I'm not going to do a reaction to it. A bunch of you have also informed me that one of the best things, if I want to read about it, is that Admiral Yi himself had diaries that he kept, and those are available and there's an English translation of them, so I definitely plan to check that out. I'm excited to do so. I hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as I have, and we will come back tomorrow with some more, not only some more reaction videos for you, but another original content video. Be watching tomorrow. Turn on your notifications. If you're not already subscribed, do that first, then turn on notifications. We're going to have the video from the Currahee cleanup project, the work that we did up on top of Currahee Mountain to clean up the graffiti. You're going to see my hike up Currahee, 3 miles up, as well as a lot of our work on the mountain itself. So check that out. That'll be tomorrow. Thanks for watching.